former Governor-General Sir Paul Reeves, Women's Day editor Sarah Henry, and the chairman of the Monarchist League, Noel Cox. Let me start with you, Sir Paul. What does the Queen represent for you?
Well, it represents the Crown, and the Crown for me represents the fact that at the whole centre of the fabric of government there are protocols, there are ways of doing things, there are things which are above the ins and outs of political life and things which are there embedded. And I think the Crown represents that and represents continuity.
But does the Queen herself represent something more than the Crown?
Well, she personalises that, of course, and I've had a chance off and on to speak with her, spend a bit of time with her, and she's a wise woman and a good operator, no doubt about that. And she's kept going for a long time, and she probably will keep going for a long time yet. So I think she works well, especially in the Commonwealth where there are indeed republics, as well as those which recognise a monarchy in their system. And as head of the Commonwealth, she is seen by republics as having a place in that sphere.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. Noel Cox, what does the Queen represent for you? Is it the same for you?
Very similar, yes. The Queen is the living personification of the Crown. And of course, the Crown as a political constitutional concept is perhaps not readily accessible to the average person. In fact, even constitutional theorists get confused about what it really means. So,
why is that?
Because it's an evolutionary system of government, and in any evolutionary system, there's not a plan, there's not a grand design, and as a result, there's a certain degree of lack of clarity, I suppose.
The Crown boxes along while the world around it changes?
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. There's a recent book on looking at the Australian Crown that's actually referred to as the title is the Chameleon Crown, or the Chameleon Crown.
Yeah.
And the idea behind that is the Crown in Australia, of course it's complicated there compared to New Zealand by the different states. The Crown has evolved over time. The theory has evolved to match what's actually happening in real life practice. Everything works reasonably successfully. The identity of the Queen remains the same. Everyone knows the Queen, everyone understands that, but this constitutional system has changed.
Let me put the same question as I put to Paul Reeves. Is there something transcendent about this Queen which goes beyond the notion of simply representing or the human embodiment of the Crown?
I think it's probably true to say that the longer someone is sovereign, the greater their influence. The Queen has been Queen since 1952, and that, in political terms, is a very, very long time. I think it's important to note that even in the 1960s, when the Queen had been on the Crown for only a decade, there was a tremendous amount of interest in the women's magazines, but it wasn't so much in Australia, New Zealand, Britain. It was actually on the continent, particularly France, Germany and Italy.
Yeah.
So there's a significant cultural, significant social aspect to the Crown. And of course, having a woman like the Queen, who has been Queen for so long and has been almost universally accepted as having made a very good job of her role, that obviously has tremendous impact. Of course, you then ask the question, what happens when there's a change and so on?
Well, I want to ask that in a moment. But first, Sarah Henry, mention of the women's magazines.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. For you, does the Queen represent something other than a source of perpetual interest?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm coming from a completely different side than the other two gentlemen here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me and for the readers of my magazine, the Queen represents glamour and represents glitz, and there's a certain romanticism surrounding the royal family, and that, you know, they live in palaces and they're princesses and they wear beautiful clothes and they have beautiful jewels, and I think that a lot of, especially women, get caught up in that, the fairy tale that is surrounding royalty, as opposed to actually the sort of constitutional right and things like that they represent. So that's where we come from on that aspect, and that's what we try and represent in the magazines. There's a great fascination with what exactly goes on behind palace doors and what they actually are like. Are they like real people, or do they live in this incredibly isolated world?
Well, they are like real people, because we now know that they are, and that they act like real people, and they have all of the foibles and failings that the rest of us have.
Yes, but I think we were all sort of shocked when that happened. You know, what, they don't have happy marriages?
I thought we'd be comforted by that.
I think it's a bit of both.
They are real, after all.
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah?
I think the magazine's been giving us that recipe and that diet for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
It's just time we got used to it. I must confess that for myself, women's magazines' portrayal of the royal family seems to be rather pap and prurient and eye in the keyhole stuff, and I don't like it at all. But there it goes.
Well, somebody mentioned the European women's magazines. They used to make up stories.
Well, they did. It's probably true to say that magazines, and not identifying any particular magazines, probably still do that. They build on rumours or a very, very brief report and build a huge edifice out of that. Now, obviously they're doing that because they want to serve their readers in the way they think the readers wish to be served.
Sarah, what do you think of that? I mean, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go that
I wouldn't
far.
make something up. I mean, you simply can't do that.
But if you had somebody who comes to you with a story saying, look, say a British correspondent or a British journalist who says, look, have you heard this? And do you want to run this? Because this is spectacular news. And it's just credible. No doubt you check it out before you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, being sued is a very expensive.
Who's going to sue you?
Oh,
the Queen doesn't sue.
Look, I mean, there is a number of people who are involved in royal circles, whether they have 5 minutes to do with the people or they're there with them 24/7, and I mean, a lot of the stories come from those type of people who are ingrained in it, but feel that they can sort of let this rumour go or that rumour go. As I said, it's about feeding that fascination that people have about what goes on behind those palace doors. Because
you need
we all
pictures
have
too, though, don't
pictures.
you?
I mean, pictures are fantastic.
But then you get the situation whereby members of the royal family sell the whole deal to a magazine.
Absolutely,
such as
like it's just happened.
Princess Royal's daughter, son, I'm sorry.
I take it you disapprove of that.
Well, I disapprove of that because I think there's a lot of stealth and subterfuge underneath all of that. Several photographers were inside wherever it was being held, and there was a reporter there, and the Queen subsequently opened it up and discovered all sorts of pictures of herself and things like that, and felt that, in fact, she had been roughly dealt with, and no doubt she had her words with the newly married couple.
Yes,
it was quite clear that the upper echelons of the royal family weren't particularly happy about the circumstances of that. But I would actually suggest that it's not necessarily the media that's a problem, if you can see it as a problem. It's not the women's magazines that are the issue. I think that one of the difficulties is the so-called friends of the prince or palace insiders who actually are not what they claim to be, but fool everyone into thinking they are.
Devious courtiers.
So-called courtiers who may have a very peripheral link, and they might have formerly worked in the stables, and subsequently they're seen as a source of information.
But
that's very troubling.
Well, that's right. But they can win large purses of money for betraying a secret.
Well, I've been in and out of the palace several times, and I would say that surrounding the Queen is the tight circle of the people who work for her, and they're not like that. Those on the outside and on the periphery maybe, but there's a tight circle, an inner circle, which I think serves her well. Also, what I was interested is that the front reception rooms are glorious and wonderful, so on and so forth. But get around the side, it's like an English hotel, actually. And the carpets are
deteriorates
worn
the
and
further
torn
back you go.
and so on and so forth. And I'm talking about Buckingham Palace.
It's a nice garden, though, isn't it?
Nice garden, especially if in the Hilton Hotel, and you can overlook the whole thing, can't you?
Yes. You can climb over the wall if you're so disposed.
Some have done that.
Days.
Yes, for anyone who's visited palaces around the world, I think Buckingham Palace comes as quite a shock. It's almost a shoddy edifice. It's not at all a regal palace that you would expect.
But that's deliberate, isn't it?
Well, every time she spends money on the palace, she's slammed in the press or around the world for being overindulgent and these aren't the times we should be living in. You must not have gilt mirrors and
well, the
that
state
sort of
rooms at the front are what they are, and I guess that costs quite a lot of money to maintain them. They are truly splendid.
We should be careful. We've just committed $40 million for the expenditure of Government House Wellington, actually. So
Well, yes.
I think the reality is that Buckingham Palace was never really designed as a state palace. It actually started as a private house, and it's just grown over the years. And a bit like the monarchy itself, if there's no general plan, there's no scheme to it, you're going to have something of a compromise.
What is public tolerance of pomp and circumstance, if I can put it that way, all of that ceremony, which is very important to British royalty?
Can I say
how
that
tolerant are the British public, you think?
I find London a very militaristic city. There's always somebody beating a drum.
Yeah.
There's always people marching around.
Yes.
And in the middle of it, there is this thing called the Palace. And, it's quite strange to be staying in the middle of London, surrounded by barracks, so on and so forth. And it has that element about it. And no doubt, there are many people who really welcome the pomp and ceremony that goes with that, be they English people or be they visitors from wherever they're coming from. And so I think that this serves many ends, not least of all tourism. Pomp and ceremony, well, speaking as a bishop of the church, knowing a little bit about that stuff, I look upon it with a grain of salt, actually.
Did you think there was too much when you were...
well, I did a little bit. I didn't quite know what was going on, actually, and where to put my left foot, where to do my right arm, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was a little hard to relax and to be at home with people. To meet them, though, subsequently, I'm talking about the royal family, and that could often be a pleasant meeting.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
But outside of that pomp and circumstance situation.
One of the features of the Queen is that she never puts a foot wrong. She has hardly put a foot wrong in terms of protocol, in terms of the way things need to be done, ever.
Well, she
and
put
it's
a major
remarkable
foot wrong.
achievement.
She
Well,
put a
she
major
has made
foot wrong
mistakes.
around Princess Diana's
Oh, yeah,
death.
look, all right. Okay,
Well, I wouldn't
those were
necessarily
exceptional
hold-
circumstances.
Yes, and I wouldn't necessarily
Beyond.
say it was the Queen's responsibility
Yeah.
there, because it very quickly turned into a political issue, which really the responsibility lay in the hands of the
Well, it got
government at the time
completely
to
out of
advise the
their
Queen.
hands, didn't it?
It did.
How much damage did Diana do the royal family? No?
Not a lot, actually. It's very interesting because the day after her death, I was talking to a reporter from the New Zealand newspaper, and he asked me what long-term effect did I think that Diana's death would have, or that her life would have on the royal family. And I said, sticking my neck out a little there, I think, that I didn't think that it was going to have much of a long-term effect. In the short term, in the medium term, Diana stirred things up a lot. But in the long term, the royal family just continues doing what it's done all along. I mean, I think it's interesting to note a lot of publicity about the Diana's landmines campaign, but everyone forgot, particularly when they were saying that here's a member of the royal family actually doing something, that Princess Anne created Save the Children Fund 30 years ago, and the Prince of Wales, with his Prince's Trust and so on, has been active for as long.
Why did people get so excited about Diana's apparent willingness to go beyond the call of duty, if I have to put it that way?
Well, I think Diana just was a media icon,
Yeah.
for good or ill, and it reminds me of an apocryphal tale, which, of course, as all apocryphal tales may or may not be true, when Prince Philip was at a state banquet or some luncheon, and someone asked him if he could sign his autograph book, and the prince replied quite frostily, something to the effect that we are not celebrities.
Yes. And that's probably a fair comment from him.
I mean, the
Yes.
royal family have a lot to thank Diana for. I think they really invigorated the interest and people being proud of their monarchy. She was a celebrity. I mean, people wanted to be her. They wanted to know what she was doing, what she was wearing, where she was going, and that created a huge resurgence in interest for the royal family, and which has been built on these days. I mean, you're saying, why do people care about what she did? Because she created headlines around the world for the fact that she went to, these sort of third world countries, and she was there doing it, hugging AIDS victims, doing all of this sort of thing. Whereas
much to the consternation, no doubt, of Princess Anne, who had been doing it for 30 years.
Absolutely, but
Or
she
the
didn't
Queen,
have
for
the
that matter.
glamour.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I recall the case, I think it was in the 1970s, where the Queen visited, and the Queen and Prince Philip visited a leper colony.
Yes.
And of course that was seen as being quite significant at the time, but the media has forgotten, most people have forgotten that sort of event.
I think that Diana was a many-sided person. I think she was also a strange person.
Yes.
I think, too, that her death did not serve Charles very well, that it highlighted certain distinctions between these two people. And in the weighing of the balance, I think that he came out worse than she did, in
Yes.
fact. And
Oh,
it's
inevitably.
been something of a shadow now on him, let alone on his future and the questions we all ask about.
Will that shadow persist?
Oh, I think so. I
Yes?
think so. I think also he's likely to be a much more active exponent or representative of the Crown, and seek to impact, I